Hello everyone. I would say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever your time is. I today's session we'll be talking about UX interview preparation. So guys, you can go ahead and drop a message on the Discord server so that others can be reminded and join in. We already have Lynette on the call. They should be taking us on this particular topic. Lynette is a UX researcher at Marathon and she's based in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you, Lynette, for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So, should I go ahead?
Yes, you can go ahead. The floor is all yours.
All right. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. So, as you've been told, my name is Lynette Kamau from Nairobi, Kenya. I'm a design researcher at a service design firm here in Kenya called Marathon Experience. You can find the information about it on our website, which is marathonxp.com. And today, here we are going to talk about UX user interviews preparation, how to ask the questions, how to prepare for user research, and some of the methodologies and frameworks that you can use in user research. So I'm going to start with the introduction, which is highlighting the importance of user experience research. So we all know how research is a very critical aspect of the design process. It's actually like the backbone of the whole design process because here is where you get the information that you'll use as a foundation to build or create whichever product, either digital or physical product that you want to for your users. And in this process, we get to understand our users' needs, behaviors, motivations, and also their emotion and how they relate to certain actions they need to perform on a certain platform or how to use a certain product. And in this stage that we normally use various methods to get this information from our users. And we have two ways of collecting this information. We can either collect it using qualitative data or quantitative. And for the quantitative data mostly tells us about the what, the quantitative data tells us about the what. And to gather this quantitative data, we normally use things like surveys, data analytics from data that has been collected over a period of time. And the qualitative data here normally tells us the why. Why are users doing certain things? Why are they dropping off at certain points? Why are they using products a certain way? So we use some methods the methods that we use to get this kind of data are normally things that involve the users directly. So like interviews, usability testing, and these methods help us to get more insight into the users' perspectives and experiences. And as we go along this session, we'll talk about some of the qualitative methods that we normally use during this user experience research process. So we're going to get into the methodologies of user research, and we are going to look at four popular methods that are currently used in the user research. There are various methods, but today we are only going to focus on the four that are used frequently, and I use frequently as well. And the first method is user interviews. So, user interviews is a process whereby you have a one on one session with your user where you get to ask them questions on a particular topic that you want to investigate. And in these user interviews, they can happen either physically or now in the era of COVID. After COVID, we discovered that we can do these interviews via Zoom calls, Google Meets, and also via phone calls. So it involves having a set of questions which we call a discussion guide that will guide you to ask the questions according to the objective of your research. And in this process, we have a number of things that you need to have done before conducting a certain interview. You need to have understood the scope of the study that you want to conduct. This means having your research questions, having your understanding your research objectives. This will then help you know the segment of users that you want to talk to. So, and it will guide you in recruiting the participants. So the other part is having to recruit the people that you're going to conduct these interviews with. And for you to to get the right set of people to talk to, you need to know what are you trying to investigate, hence having to understand the objectives of your study. And once you having recruited your participants, you have to have a script that you're going to use to enable you to help you guide your conversation with the user. Because sometimes if you don't have a clear way of tracking what you need to find out from the users, sometimes you might do a very elaborate interview. You've talked to your customer or your user, you've talked for a while, but when you go back to analyze your data, you find that you haven't been able to answer the questions that you needed to answer. So that's why we need a script that will guide our conversation. And it should be noted that this script, you're not going to read it. It's a guide, not something that you go to read word for word for your user, because essentially this session should be very conversational and interactive with the user. The user shouldn't feel like you're interviewing them. And we're going to get into the details of the principles of how to best conduct these interviews with your user further along in this presentation. And the reason, the best place to use this user interviews is when you're trying to understand the user's perspectives on certain things, their motivations, like why do they do things the way they do. You're also trying to identify their pain points and opportunities that you can be able to bring to them with your product or service. And user interviews have great benefits because they help you tap into the emotional self of your users. You're able to understand their behaviors, and you can tell a lot from user interviews, even from how a user responds to you, their body language. We take note of all these things while we are conducting these interviews, because as you're analyzing, they'll help you understand what kind of user or persona that you are looking at as you are conducting these interviews. So the thing about user interviews is sometimes they can be very time consuming, because you can't really measure the amount of time that a user will take to explain to you a certain concept. And sometimes when you go to these users and you tell them what you're trying to do and how it might benefit them, once you get their buy-in, some users just want to share and continue sharing. You might find that an interview that you had slotted for 30 minutes ends up being 1 hour. So sometimes that might be a disadvantage. But from my experience, I think I love users that like sharing, because you get to understand a lot about them and their behaviors and motivations. Another thing is that this method is also prone to bias by the person conducting the interview, especially if the person is conducting the interview alone. You find like when they are reporting the session or the data that they collected from the interview, they give their perspective from how they understood what the user was trying to say, which is not the right way to do things, because it ends up altering your data, hence making it inadequate. But there's some ways where how we can bypass that bias is by um, having a recording, either a video or voice recording of the session, and this should only be done when the user has consented it. And you can also have another person join you in the interview. So normally it is advised to have like two people doing the interview. So one is asking the questions and the other one is doing the note taking. But sometimes you find that resources are limited and you have to be the one asking the questions, the note taking, and the recording. But in this case, you're able to bypass the bias by having the recording on your side. So we'll go to the next one. The next one is usability testing. So this one normally involves observing users use a particular product or experience a certain service. So it might be a digital product whereby you're testing an app and you're trying to see or evaluate how the users are using this product. So in this case, you typically have like a list of scenarios or tasks that you want the user to perform with your product or service. And so most of this, a lot of the times, this is done in person, but there are also scenarios that it can be done remotely via tools like there are very many tools that are used to enable you to conduct usability testing remotely. And in this process, you find that there can be also a lot of bias in that, especially if you're doing it in person. The key aspect of usability testing is observation. So you give the user the app or the product, and you give them a scenario of how they should use it. So let's say it's a retail app. So you give them a scenario whereby they need to buy a certain good on the app and complete till checkout. So your role as the researcher is to observe how the user uses this product. But you find sometimes you may, as because you have seen the product and you've seen how it works, you might be tempted to, when a user gets stuck, you might be tempted to tell them to press here, or if they ask you a question like how do I go from here, you guide them. That's not how it's supposed to be, because the moment a user asks you like how they need to navigate this that particular app, it's or a product, like it's actually a problem. That means that the product is not intuitive enough for the user to understand how to navigate through it. So you shouldn't be quick to um, to give them a solution, because it will affect the nature of your study. You won't get accurate results, because at the end of the day, you want to understand how the user uses the product. Are they able to achieve the job they need to do on the platform or while using the service? And how can you improve on it? Yeah, so that's about usability testing. So the thing about this usability testing, you can't really it can't really stand on its own, as it doesn't capture the user's behavior or um, how they feel towards certain things um, accurately as you would in interviews. So sometimes you might need to complement two methods at the same time in some cases. Then we have contextual inquiry. So this method is mainly or purely observation. So it involves you as the researcher joining a user in their natural environment and observing them perform their day-to-day tasks with regards to certain services or products. So, for example, I had a project whereby I was trying to understand the the voluntary health workers here in Kenya on how they conduct their activities, how they sensitize people around the HPV vaccine. And one of the methods I used was contextual inquiry. So I had a selected number of health workers who I followed around for a day. So I had a schedule whereby I would follow one health worker a day. So I would join them in the morning at their home. Then I will accompany them as they do their visits around the communities. I would observe how they interact with the with the community, with the different people, taking observation into the tools that they would use when doing these tasks, observing how they interact with the different people, how they relay information to them, and this and following them during their day helped me see the challenges that they encounter from how they perform their tasks. I was able to identify their needs, and I was also able to identify their behaviors, especially when it comes to interaction with the different people in the community, and how it helps them to achieve their task of educating people on the HPV vaccine at the end of the day. And this process normally is also quite time consuming. And sometimes, depending on how the person you're shadowing is, they might try to be on their best behavior. So sometimes it affects the nature of data that you collect, because you might find that maybe that's the day they do all the right processes, yet when they're on their own, they don't. But we also need to be very careful when we are doing this kind of study and inform the user or the subject how how this study will impact them and what the purpose of the study is, so that they understand and are able to collaborate in this process. So also during this process, there's a lot of note taking. You're basically like a fly on the wall. Your work is just to observe. Sometimes maybe you might see something interesting based on the tools that they are using. You might ask questions. In this method, we also do a lot of evidence taking. So we take a lot of pictures, like pictures of the tools that they use, pictures of how they interact, and all this is taken again at the consent of the subject. So you just don't whip up your camera and start taking photos without asking for permission, because our aim here is to be very human centered and empathetic, to the subjects that we are trying to understand. Then the last methodology that I'll talk about is card sorting. This is a very interesting method to use in research, and I find that I've managed myself, I've been able to use it mostly when I'm trying to understand how a user would navigate a certain platform. So, card sorting is basically having a group of information organized in a set of cards. So if you're trying to build an app and you're trying to understand how a user would use that app, you list all the features in a set of cards. Then you go to the participants and give them the, you don't arrange them on how you'd like the features to appear. You just arrange them randomly. Then you show the participant and tell them to pick the cards according to how they would, or what's important to them. And how they pick it will tell you what's what are the key features that these users are interested in, the key jobs that they need to do on this platform, and it will help you arrange these features for your product or service as you're building it. And it's very I find this method very essential for UX designers, especially when they're trying to arrange the information architecture of an app, and also the navigation through which the users will experience that app. It also helps them in the content organization. So you're able to arrange information in a way that makes sense to the users, in a way that makes the app intuitive and has a wholesome experience for the user at the end of the day. Sometimes this might be very time consuming, because at times the participant might not have a great understanding of features or technology, but they will be able to explain to you what they need on a certain platform. So, as much as they wouldn't understand certain terms, they would give you terms on how they better understand these terms, which helps you also in um, doing in labeling your product in a way that is suitable for your target user at the end of the day. I have used this method when I was doing research for a health systems management app. So we were building a module for nurses, and you find that nurses in hospitals have a lot of tasks, a lot of forms that they need to fill daily for their different patients. So they have a cardex that has different sections, and they have to fill all this information for all the patients as they are doing their rounds at the different times of the day in their shifts. So we had a set of cards with all the segments in the cardex, be it treatments, dosage for medicine, and we shared them with them, and they were telling us what's important and what they begin with when they're doing their rounds, and this helped us to create an app that was beneficial for them, because it wasn't taking them away from their norm. So it was basically mimicking what they do physically, but into a digital format, which helped them do their work better and faster. And they were able to have all the records of their patients, and they also didn't have to allocate time specifically for paperwork because they could do it digitally on the go as they see each patient. So it was a very interesting exercise to do with the nurses, especially they were so fascinated because a lot of them weren't tech savvy. But once they expressed to us their needs, when they saw the app, they were really surprised that it was something easy that they could use, and it mimicked what they were doing physically, and it was even easier and made their work easier, and the time that they used to perform this task much shorter. So after this, now what we're going to go into preparing for the user interviews. So while preparing for user interviews, there are certain things that we need to check before we conduct these interviews. And it is very important for you to have a plan before you start conducting these interviews. And some of the things that we need to do before the user interviews, I'm going to discuss in this session. So one of the most important things that we need to do before every research study is to define research objectives. And by defining research objectives, this means that you understand what the study is, what it is for, and what you're trying to achieve with these research activities. So having these research objectives enable you to stay focused and not divert from what you need to learn from your users, because at times you might get carried away. Being researchers, we are curious in nature, and sometimes we might get carried away with new information that we are getting from our users that is not aligning with our objectives. So we need to be very clear on our research objectives and define them very early on the as we begin the research process. The second thing is selecting the appropriate research methods. So based on what you want to achieve from this research or this study, you need to understand the different methods, how they are used, and how you can use them to achieve certain things. So in this case, if you're trying to understand how users use like your app, you know you're going to conduct the usability study to be able to understand how they use it. If you want to understand the reason why the users do certain things around payments, you'll go and ask them certain questions. You'll do user interviews to understand that. If you want to understand how to arrange features on your app, you know you'll do card sorting. And if you want to find out, like in terms of numbers, how many people use this kind of payment method, you'll know you need to go to surveys, because surveys will give you what the users are doing and how many are doing that action. So understanding your objective will help you align on the research method that you need to use. And a lot of the times you find that we as user researchers, we use the mixed methods approach, whereby we use various methods to complement each other to be able to get what we need for our study. So you might complement user interviews with usability testing, or usability testing with card sorting and focus groups, etc. So it's up to you as the researcher to determine, okay, what am I trying to achieve with this study, and how am I going to achieve it? It will help guide you to choose the right research methods. The other thing that you need to do that I think I spoke about earlier on is recruit participants. So you need to develop a clear plan on how to recruit participants. And if you and here you need to be very very careful because the criteria of your participant selection is very key to the quality of data that you will get from the users for your study. So you need to understand, okay, so I'm trying to do a study on health management systems for nurses. So you try to understand which kind of nurses are you talking to, which age, from which kind of hospitals, which demographics. So you need to understand, according to your research goals and objectives, what kind of participants are you going to recruit. And it's a very, for me, I think this is it's a challenging bit when it comes to research because yeah, you can have a clear plan on how to recruit these participants, but sometimes the availability of the participants can be frustrating because as you're beginning your research, you obviously have a research plan whereby you have allocated time for certain tasks in the research study. And you find that when it comes to recruitment, it drags along your process, um, not giving you enough time to even conduct the research itself. So here we need to be very smart about how we do this. And for recruiting participants, there are many ways. There are very various ways of recruiting participants, depending on the study. So you can recruit from your personal network of people. If you have a client and they already have existing customers or users, you can get a list of users from them. There are also companies which help recruit participants for such activities. So that's also another method of recruiting participants. So you have to also ensure that you have enough participants to be able to gather enough quality data for your analysis. And at times you find as you conduct your research, you might have thought that you needed like 50, you needed to talk to like 50 people, but you find when you've reached 30, you're getting to a point of diminishing returns whereby excuse me, you're getting the same information and you're not learning anything new from your participants. So at this point, it is safe to stop the study because it means that you've already gotten the data that you needed to have gotten with that set of people. So as long as you've been able to answer all the research questions that you had intended to, and you feel like you're reaching a point of diminishing returns, you can make the call to stop the interviews and start analyzing, doing synthesizing the data that you have already collected from the beginning of your interviews. Then another step for preparing user interviews is creating now the research materials. So in this case, there will be the interview discussion guides, the usability test scenarios, the survey questionnaires, and you need to ensure that they are very clear. Even the language that is being used on the discussion guide needs to align with the target audience or the target users that you want to talk to, and different tones for different types of users. So you might find if it's a discussion guide for or a usability test scenario for a more casual, a very casual target audience, you will tend to use casual language. If it's for corporate people, you need to ensure that the language is very corporate because they tend to be very sensitive. So you need to tailor your instruments to the different categories of users that you talk to. Then you also need to set up a conducive research environment for your users. So a lot of times you find that we go to the users themselves. So even as you go to them, you need to ensure that they feel comfortable, you've gotten buy-in from them. But if you're calling them to a certain location to come and conduct the interview or research sessions with them, it can be a focus group. You need to ensure that the space is conducive and friendly, and they are able to access what they need for the different exercises that you need them to run. So you need to ensure that you have everything you need and plan way in advance, not figuring out when the users are there. Managing logistics is also a big part. At times, you find that you may need to arrange for transportation if you're going to visit the participants. So, if you're traveling, you need to ensure that you've booked your tickets or made transport arrangements in advance. If you need to sleep there, you also need to have booked the location in advance. If it's incentives, you also need to have that in advance for your users. So just plan and manage everything that you need and have a checklist of all that you need before you start this process. Another thing is also to prepare for potential challenges. So one of the challenges would be like the recruitment of participants. So you've recruited a participant, then on the day of they don't show up. What do you do? So one of the ways um, to curb this challenge is maybe recruiting a number beyond the targeted segment of users that you needed to talk to. Because it happens that a participant you had agreed at a certain time, you call them, they don't pick up the phone to confirm if they're available. You go to their premise, they're not there, or they don't want to talk to you anymore. So you need to be prepared um and prepared in a way that if if a participant cancels on you, it doesn't drown your spirits, and your um, y- in a way that you don't feel like it has compromised your study. So you need to be prepared for anything and be ready for anything. You might find rude participants. You just need to know how to handle yourself in such cases. Sometimes you might be doing an online session, you have technical issues like internet connectivity. You need to ensure that you have a backup to be able to meet this without in order to not compromise your study. Another thing is also to effectively manage your time and resources. So, and that's why you need to ensure you have a research plan with every task allocated time to it for the whole study. Because a lot of times, these studies are tied to certain projects with timelines, and you need to meet those timelines. So use those plans faithfully as you're conducting your research process and not carried away with the process as in its own. So when it comes to asking users questions, it's a very important part of user interviews. It's a very important part of user interviews. And the type of questions that you ask really determine the quality of data that you collect from your users. And you need to be very smart in the way you frame your questions. And in user interviews, a lot of the questions, the question format is mostly unstructured, in that we use a lot of open-ended questions to elaborate the users to give us more information as time goes by. So the better you design your questions, the better information you get from your users. And framing effective questions, this means that you need to ask open-ended questions. So this allow users to provide elaborate responses, because they are not tied to variables. And like if you ask a close-ended question, you'll either get a yes or no answer, and that will be it. You won't be able to elaborate further. Also, avoid leading questions. So these are questions that lead the user to answer a certain way. And if you ask leading questions, they will lead you to gather inaccurate data, because it will be based on certain assumptions that you have yourself as a researcher. Another thing is to use neutral language. So this is by avoiding technical terms or jargon as much as you, as the researcher, understand them. The user might not. So you need to use a language that is easily understandable to them in order to get accurate responses. So an example of an effective question would be, tell me about your experience using the website. What worked well for you? So in this case, it's an open-ended question, and it encourages the user to share their experience and gives them a chance to elaborate on what they're talking about, and you'll be able to gain insight into the user's perspective. Instead of asking, did you find the website easy to use? So here they might tell you yes or no, or they will tell you an answer that is geared towards giving a positive response or a negative response, but it doesn't give you detail onto how they experience the website, or how they are able to use it and for what. So it ties down the response to a very narrow range of insight, and that's not what we want when we are asking these users questions. So there are certain things that you will need to do when you're having these sessions with your users. So one and the most important thing that you need to do is to state the verbal consent and ensure that the respondent agrees to the review, to the interview or recording that you would want to do. Excuse me for a bit. So as I was saying, like it's very important to get the verbal consent from the users that you're talking to ensure that they're comfortable you recording or even taking notes, because there are some users who are not comfortable when people are recording or taking notes because they feel like they are being interviewed or they are being tested in some way. So you need to ask in advance before you start asking these questions. Another thing, you need to build rapport with the users. You need to make them feel like you're having a conversation, and this means that you also need to have a very relaxed body language. Do not look them directly in the eye. Do not express any kind of judgment into how they're answering the questions, and also make them comfortable in a way that if they're not comfortable in answering certain questions, you can allow them not to. Don't force them to answer a question if they are not comfortable. So another thing is also be respectable. So you need to, if you told a client, that a user, that you're meeting them at 10, meet them at that time. Don't be late, be polite, and ensure that you also answer their questions. Cover Be sure to cover all topics that you need to cover using the discussion guide, but sometimes a lot of times it's the user who leads the conversation. So as much as the user doesn't answer the questions in alignment with the sequence of the questions in a discussion guide, do not stop them or or cut them off and tell them they need to answer this question next. No, just let them go with the flow and just ensure that they've been able to cover all the topics that you need to. Another thing is you need to write as many quotes as possible, because this help us empathize with the users as we are analyzing the data after the research. Also, be keen to circle on themes that are standing out while you're writing these notes, because the objectives that you're trying, or the research questions you're trying to answer. You know the certain things that you're trying to look at, and after you do a certain number of interviews, there are some things that will start popping up from the different interviews that you've conducted, so you can be circling or taking note of those themes as you continue doing the interviews. Another thing that is very important is probing and asking the why. You need to make your user comfortable enough to give you examples and details, because this is what will help you um, build or ideate on solutions that will benefit them directly and not just on a superficial level. Another thing is also, don't suggest answers to your questions. Sometimes you might find that a user might pause before answering your question. As it's also good to embrace the silence. And sometimes if you feel like a user is not like letting loose or being open enough to share something, you can maybe share a story from your perspective on how it relates to you as a person, and maybe it will help them now open up and be comfortable because you've shared something similar, or something in that humanizes you and takes you away from just being an interviewer to being a peer. Because at times you might find that a user might be reserved on their comments because they feel like they're being judged based on their responses. You need to make them feel very comfortable. At times, you need to repeat statements to confirm that you've understood correctly. We do this to avoid misinterpretation of what the user said, because a user might say something but you interpret it differently. So if you feel like there's something very elaborate that they've shared, you can give a summary of what they've said, and ensure that they agree that's exactly what they have said. And another important thing is to have a debriefing after each interview. So this will help you not forget what you've discussed with the user, and it will also help you take put down notes that you've gathered, important points that you've been able to gather as you're conducting the interviews. In my team, we normally do a session that we call download and synthesis. So after a day of interviews or after every interview, we normally have a session with the team and share different aspects or different information that we've been able to gather during our interviews. And what this helps us with is that we are able to pick out the things that are standing out from the different users. We are also able to start analyzing, like on the personas, we can see different personas popping out from the different interviews. We are also able to improve on our discussion guides as we do every interviews, because as you talk to the different users, there's some things that they say that you hadn't necessarily thought of asking initially. So it's a very important part of the interview process. So I know I've spoken a lot. We've talked about the importance of asking effective questions, the key steps that you need to do in preparing the user research, the popular methodologies and used in user research, and the significance of user research in the design process. So I'd like to give time to anyone to ask questions as we are almost running out of time.
Okay. Hello, Lynette. Yeah, we have a lot of questions. Yeah.
Okay, I can't see them because I'm
Okay,
sharing
so
my
I'm putting
screen.
them on the screen now so you can see them on your screen.
I stopped sharing my screen.
No, no, I said you can see the questions on your screen now.
Okay, I think I'll have to move. I'll have to move screens. Let me stop sharing.
Okay.
Where are the
Can
questions?
you see them?
So the first question I see is from Joseph. Do we just interview any random person when designing a product, or are there certain persons you ask? So, as I mentioned earlier, when you're starting your research study, you have certain objectives that you need to meet. And these objectives help you narrow down to the particular set of users that you need to use to ask questions. So if you're trying to create a product or a service for young people or for the youth, you need to specify in your segmentation which kind of youth that you're talking to. Are they youth in the urban areas or rural areas? Are they youth who are employed, students, or who have families? So, based on what you want to understand from the research, you'll be able to narrow down to the type of person to interview or to talk to. So the other question is from Abigail. Is contextual inquiry methodologies important while designing a product, or can we go for any method that we prefer? Yeah, so there I talked about a number of methodologies, and this is very much based on what you need to get from the study. So it's not a must to use all the methods that have been stated. What matters is what are you trying to get from this study? So, like in contextual inquiry, it will be best placed if you're trying to understand, if you're trying to build a product that affects the users' day to day lives. So, this means that you need to understand what they do, like from the moment that they wake up. to the moment they go back home. You need to understand how well or how best placed will this product be in this user's lives. So in that particular case, you'll need to do contextual inquiry, but it's not a necessary method to use while designing all products. It depends. How do you ensure user research data? This is from David. How do you ensure that user research data collected is accurate, reliable, and unbiased? So I mentioned one of the ways is taking a lot of evidence from the research. So that means recording the sessions, taking a lot of pictures, if resources allow, allow conducting the research more than one person, because this now the data will not be based just on one interviewer or based on what they interpreted. It will be based on the pure observation that has been seen by the two researchers. So you'll be able to get two perspectives. If you record, you'll be able to hear everything that was discussed, and there won't be any misinterpretation of the information that was given, because you're able to listen back to the recording and also view the transcripts of the interviews that that you've conducted. So we are prone to bias because we are humans, but as we do this process, we try to minimize bias as much as possible. Because also when we are analyzing data, we tend to analyze data based on also our existing knowledge of human behavior and psychology and all that. But the key is to minimize the bias as much as possible to ensure that your data is accurate. Can you please share the hardest thing you face when doing research and also when building a product? So for me, the hardest challenge that I encounter when doing research is when it comes to the recruitment of users, because a lot of times you might be clear on on the target participants that you need to talk to, but their availability is very difficult to get them. So that has been a big challenge for all my projects. I don't think there's a project or research study that I've done that has gone seamless, especially when it comes to recruiting. Because at times you find, yes, we've allocated like 2 weeks for recruitment, but you find in that 2 weeks you needed to talk to 20 participants, but you end up only having talked to 5 or scheduling 5. So a lot of the times I find myself and my team recruiting as we are doing the interviews. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we have when doing when doing the research, because I do a lot of user interviews. Another thing is also when you're doing things like when you're using methods like contextual inquiries, there are times that it has made me go into areas that are perceived not safe. So you find like you need to talk to people who live in the slums. So you find like you also need to limit your resources based on the safety of the environment. So you find like there you can't go with your smartphone or your laptop, because it might be stolen. So you end up going like maybe just a pen and notebook, and all you can rely on is just writing notes because of the safety of the area. And sometimes even the users warn you about the safety of the area. But so those are some of the challenges that I can say I've experienced so far. Another thing that I've experienced while conducting research is language barriers. You find that you go into places whereby they don't speak your mother tongue or your local language, and you need to find a translator. So a lot of times I was caught off guard because you assume everyone is speaking the national language. So it's hard to find a translator impromptu. You need to rely on a friendly person who can offer to do the translation. But a lot of times we were able to manage and get through those obstacles. Yes. No, that's the same question. Is there any other question? From Abdul, what method is best for recruiting participants? I wouldn't say there's a best method per se. Uh, a lot of times we incorporate various methods, and it also depends on the nature of project that you're doing. And I think I mentioned some of the ways that you can recruit participants. I wouldn't say there's a best way per se. It just depends on what's readily available and if it suits your needs for the study. So you can recruit from the network of people around you. You can recruit from existing users if it's for an already existing product. You can use recruitment companies to help you with that. Another thing that I don't see working most of the time is the random selection of people. Like you're just walking up down in the street and you walk up to a random person and start asking them questions. Sometimes it works, but I don't think it just depends on the needs of the study. And I think I answered that question earlier on. How do you deal with bias? Since we can't accurately know how a user will behave during the interview, how do you handle a user that gets angry while the interviewer is probing and asking the why? Okay, I think I talked about this but a bit. So when you're conducting interviews, like you have no way of predicting how a user will behave. Sometimes I've found myself in situations whereby you're trying to conduct interviews for an existing product, and this customer wasn't happy. And like from the moment I told them that I'm trying to talk to them about this and this product, they just started ranting and giving their displeasure about about the product to the extent of even using vulgar words. In this case, you can't really do much about it. You just need to maintain your cool, let them say their piece, and if they don't want to continue the conversation, you can just end it there. And if a user is getting irritated when you are probing and asking the why, I think the moment you sense that the user is becoming uncomfortable, you just need to retreat, because we also don't want to put ourselves in a situation whereby it's uncomfortable for everyone. We want to make the user as comfortable as possible. So if you sense that they are feeling uncomfortable with certain questions, just reassure them that if they're not comfortable, don't need to answer, and you can stop probing further if they're not open for it. So yeah, you just need to have that emotional intelligence to be able to guide you or know when to stop. Same question. Uh, okay. So you answered. You talked about. The question is, you talked about not leading the user on. How do you achieve accurate research with most yes and no answers? So I think this is mostly informed by the nature of how you're asking the questions. So if you find yourself getting yes and no answers, that means that your question format is wrong and not effective. So you need to go back to the drawing board and check on your discussion guide and see um, how you've structured the questions. And I think I've given an example of how you can have an effective question versus an ineffective question. Because if you have a question that bounds the user to answer against two variables, that's what you're going to get. So you need to be very keen on how you structure your questions. And I believe the next session that you're going to have is on how to do this, an elaborate session on how to write these questions. So it all depends on how you've structured your question. So you need to, before using the script or the discussion guide with the users, you need to do a run through with your team if you have one, or you can try it with someone close to you and see and test the guide before putting it into use. Are there any more questions? We have gone past time.
Okay. So I think this is the last one I can see.
Oh, I think that one I've answered in one of the questions that have been asked before.
Okay, all right. Perfect. So thank you so much, Lynette, for being on the call. Thank you for your time. We have learned a lot of things today and we got more understanding on dealing with users.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In case of any questions, people should feel free to reach out on my LinkedIn. I see you've put it there on the screen. Looking forward to stay more in touch.
All right. Thank you so much. So guys, you can go ahead and connect with Lynette on LinkedIn. She just told you she's free to connect with you and you can ask her questions. So thank you once again. It was nice having you here. Have a
Thank you
lovely
too.
afternoon.
Have a good afternoon as well. Thank you.
All right. Bye everyone. See you in the evening. So